Hi kids! I hope you're all doing very well, that you've had a good week and that you're excited to be learning more about the Bible today. So today we're going to be talking about Joseph, Prince of Egypt, and how he ended up becoming that. So Joseph was born in the land of Canaan and his dad was called Israel. In Genesis 37 verse 3 and 4 we read, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons, because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age, and he made a robe of many colors for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his other brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Now, because Joseph was his favorite child, their brothers hated Joseph and they didn't like him. Now, what also didn't help is that Joseph had a lot of dreams, and in some of these dreams, he had bundles of grain and stars bowed down to him, and he told his brothers that one day they were going to bow down to him as well, and that made his brothers really angry. Now, one day, his brothers went off to go pasture some sheep in the fields, and Joseph was sent there to go check up on his brothers. And when he managed to get to his brothers, because their dad wasn't there, his brothers took him and they threw him in a well. And some of his brothers were talking about how they could kill him, but their one brother suggested, hey, let's rather sell him into slavery, then we can get some money and also we don't have to kill him. So that's what they ended up doing. And they went home and they took Joseph's coat and made it full of animal blood and told their father that Joseph was killed by a wild animal, and their father was very sad. Meanwhile, Joseph was sent to Egypt and became a slave for this man called Potiphar. And Potiphar was one of the Pharaoh's chief people in command, and he was very rich and had a lot of other slaves as well. Now, Joseph worked really hard for Potiphar, and because God was with Joseph, he prospered in everything that he did. Now, Potiphar saw that Joseph was working hard, and Potiphar put Joseph in charge of everything in his house and even made him his personal servant. So Joseph was put in charge of everything that Potiphar had. And Potiphar's wife ended up being very jealous of Joseph, and she tried to get Joseph to sin. But Joseph, because he followed God, didn't want to sin. And Potiphar's wife got really angry and she made up this lie that Joseph did something to her. And Potiphar believed her and ended up throwing Joseph in jail. So Joseph did nothing wrong. He was working really hard and following God, but now he ended up being thrown in prison. And even in prison, we see Joseph working really hard. So in Genesis 39, verse 22 to 23, it says, "The warden put all the prisoners who were in prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with everything under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. So now Joseph was even put in charge of the prison. He was still in prison, one of the prisoners, but he was in charge of all the other prisoners. And some of the prisoners ended up having dreams, okay? And Joseph was able to interpret their dreams for them. Now, one of the prisoners was called the cupbearer, and he was one of Pharaoh's cupbearers, but he ended up being thrown in prison. And he asked Joseph to interpret his dream. And Joseph said, "In a couple of days you will be released from prison. Please tell Pharaoh about me, because I did nothing wrong to be here." So the cupbearer got released from prison, but when he got back, he forgot to tell Pharaoh about Joseph. So Joseph had to spend even more time being in prison. But one day, God gave Pharaoh a dream, and Pharaoh needed someone to interpret the dream for him, and Pharaoh became very restless. When the cupbearer heard that Pharaoh was looking for someone to interpret the dream, he remembered about Joseph, and he told Pharaoh about him. So Pharaoh called Joseph, and we read in Genesis 40, verse 14 to 16. "Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and they quickly brought him from the dungeon. He shaved, changed his clothes, and went to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'I have a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said about you that you can hear a dream and interpret it.' 'I am not able to,' Joseph answered Pharaoh. 'It is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer.' So Pharaoh told Joseph his dreams, and Joseph managed to interpret them. And the dreams were about a big famine, a lack of food that's going to come across a lot of places, including Egypt. But it was only going to happen in a couple of years. So because they knew that this famine was coming, they managed to store up a lot of food over the next couple of years to prepare for this famine that's coming. And we read in Genesis 41 verse 40, it says, Pharaoh told Joseph, "You will be over my house, and all my people will obey your commands. Only I as king will be higher than you." So Pharaoh was so amazed that Joseph interpreted his dream that he put Joseph in command of the entire Egypt, except only Pharaoh was higher than him. So coming out of this place of slavery into being in prison, he is now second in command over the entire country of Egypt. And what ended up happening is the famine came, and all the other countries around Egypt didn't have any food. So they came to Egypt to come get food. Now, some of the people that ended up coming to Egypt was Joseph's brothers. And at first, Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him, but Joseph knew they were his brothers. And he gave them food and sent them back, and when they came back again, Joseph revealed to them who he really was. And we read in Genesis 50, verse 18 to 21, "His brothers also came to him, bowed down before him, and said, 'We are your slaves.' But Joseph said to them, 'Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me, but God planned for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. Therefore don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your children.' And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So even after all these terrible things that Joseph's brothers did, Joseph forgave them and he was nice to them. And those dreams that he had when he was young of his brothers bowing down to him, even they came true. So we see from that dream coming true and Joseph's entire life that God was still with him. And even though he had to serve in prison and he was a slave, God still used those events to prepare him for what he eventually had to do. See, he was put in charge as being a slave. He was put in charge as being in prison. But God ended up putting him in charge of Egypt and using those things to train him for what God wanted to eventually use him out to be. So if you're going through some hard times in your life and you don't know why it's happening, maybe God is just using them to prepare you for something bigger that he has in mind for you. So God has a plan for every single one of you, and you need to remember that God can even use the hard things to prepare you for something bigger he planned for you. So I have one last verse, and this verse is in Romans, if I can find it quickly, Romans 8 verse 28, and it says, "We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose." See, God makes everything work together for our good. And he knows so much more than we know. So we don't always know what's good for ourselves, but God does. So we need to trust God and know that he has a plan for our life.